most historians now prefer the terms early Middle Ages or early medieval period. And then it goes on to say, climate change had an influence on the movement.
That is the psychological reason why. These are weirdos. They love calling someone like J.D. Vance a weirdo. They're the weirdos. The truth will lie in wait for all time, if needs be. It's not going anywhere. You can't annihilate it. You can't annihilate the truth. And the truth is that there were Anglo Saxons. It's a real thing. There is a country of England. We are Englishmen.
Yeah.
And we exist. And the liar will not succeed, ultimately.
Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 10 of the State of It podcast with your host, Lewis Brackpool. In this episode, I'd like to welcome my guest, Beau Dade. Beau is a podcast host and content creator on the esteemed British media organisation, the Lotus Eaters, and regularly posts on his own YouTube channel, HistoryBro, where his speciality is in historical truths from many eras. Beau has an undergraduate degree in ancient history and a postgraduate degree in government policy and politics. In this episode, we discussed Anglo Saxon history, an insight into where you can read more about Anglo Saxon history and English history without any prejudice from critical race theorists, and why academics want to erase the term Anglo Saxon from the curriculum. We also touched on the gravitational pull towards classical literature and film in our current political and social climate. I hope you enjoyed this podcast as much as I did, as Beau definitely does not mince his words and will tell you exactly how he feels about a given subject. This podcast is available to watch on YouTube, Rumble, and now X. You can also listen to the episode on Spotify. Beau Dade, thank you so much for joining me. How are you, good sir?
I'm all good. Thank you for having me. I hope you're well.
Yeah, all well this end, despite the misery of the news these days. It's just, I don't know, sometimes I feel myself just blackpilling every single day, but I'm trying not to.
Yeah, it's an endless slew of despair. And by design, you've got to learn to let it roll off of you. You can't get to... I mean, what I do here at Lotus Eaters, it's sort of a daily grind, and in my first year or so, there's a couple of days where I felt truly sort of depressed, black-pilled. You touch grass, take a break from it, you realise you're actually largely powerless one way or another anyway, and don't let the bastards get you down. Oh, are we allowed to swear?
Of course we are, no problem.
Fuck yeah.
Yes,
no,
exactly.
Sorry, I'll be sensible.
No, you're all good. So in this podcast, I wanted to go through a bit of Anglo-Saxon history. What prompted this was two particular articles that I saw that I decided to post on my Twitter account. One of them was titled, "Anglo-Saxons Aren't Real. Cambridge Tells its Students in Effort to Fight Nationalism." And the other one is a recent news article on August the 31st, which says, "University cancels Anglo-Saxon to, quote, to decolonize the curriculum." So I thought, I've obviously been chatting to you privately, and I've asked you personally for recommendations on literature and all sorts, and especially obviously history, because that's your jam. And I thought I'd get you on to speak a bit about Anglo-Saxon history and why academics want to seemingly change or erase that. Now, do you have any thoughts just off the bat before we get properly stuck in?
Why they want to try and cancel it or erase it?
Yeah.
Because they're insane communists that have got a chip on their shoulder that can be seen from orbit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because they're mad. They're suffering from a type of insanity. That's what it is. So you've got these, there's various academics, because Survive the Jive, aka Tom Rosell, has been in the forefront of this for quite a while. And there's a great interview I did with him about nearly a year ago now on Lotus Eaters where we talk all about it. And there's a few names. There's someone called Mary Olm. There's a Dr. Eric Wade. There's a couple of these people, and I don't know exactly what they are because they keep their cards close to their chest a bit, but they're obviously Marxists, communists, hardline leftist socialists, whether they're structuralists, post-structuralists, whether they're into critical theory, critical race theory, critical discourse analysis, all this stuff. What it is they hate themselves and they hate the West, and they've got a massive chip on their shoulder about it, and they will do anything to burn it down, to undermine it for their own sake, because they're deeply unhappy people. That's why. I mean, that is the psychological reason why. These are weirdos. They love calling someone like J.D. Vance a weirdo. They're the weirdos. They're the freaks. An intellectual perversion, an intellectual disease. These people trying to deny reality that the Anglo Saxons didn't exist. Like, there's not loads and loads of literary evidence, like the Venerable Bede or the Anglo Saxon Chronicle or the writings of people like Geoffrey Monmouth or something. There's not loads of archaeological evidence, like the Sutton Hoo treasures, endless archaeological evidence. It happened, it's real. Angleland, the land of England, the kings of the West Saxons. It's all real, it's beyond doubt, it's documented fact. And they want to fly in the face of that. And to me, any normal person, that's insane. They're suffering from a type of insanity. And at the very least, we can call it out and ridicule it, at the very, very least.
At the very least, indeed. Well, I wanted to get your reaction. I was on just history.org, right? Just a casual history website that, of course, well, after reading it, I want to get your reaction to this. So I looked at the Anglo-Saxon period on this website, and I just want to read you an extract from it. It says, the Anglo-Saxon period in Britain spans approximately the 6 centuries from 410 to 1066 AD. The period used to be known as the Dark Ages, mainly because written sources for the early years of Saxon invasion are scarce. However, most historians now prefer the terms early Middle Ages or early medieval period. And then it goes on to say, climate change had an influence on the movement of the Anglo-Saxon invaders to Britain. In the centuries after 400 AD, Europe's average temperature was 1 degree warmer than we have today. And in Britain, grapes could be grown as far north as, I believe that's Tyneside. Now, I don't know why climate change is, but well, I say I don't know why. We know why. It's predictive programming. It's forced nudge units that are trying to nudge people into that direction. But that's history.org.uk. I mean, I'm sure children, teenagers that are doing like their schoolwork, their coursework, homework, are using sites like this and then being flooded with this propaganda that has nothing to do with Anglo-Saxon history. Why would you want to put in the temperature of the Anglo-Saxon period? I don't know. It seems a bit sus, don't you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. These are scum. These people are scumbags. Okay, they're activists that are just using Anglo-Saxon studies and history as a vehicle to perpetuate their insane commie nonsense. It's clearly, obviously, what it is. And what I find it absolutely disgusting. I call a spade a spade. That's exactly what it is. These are activists, and they're hijacking our history and our heritage in order to perpetuate some freakish narrative of their own, in order to control us today in the present. That's what it is. That's what all this stuff is. Someone like, I don't know, Robin DiAngelo say, like whiteness studies, but also climate change, or whatever nonsense. It doesn't even really need to make sense, does it? It doesn't really need to all logically add up and make sense. They're not interested in that necessarily. They're interested in trying to guilt people. It's really, really dark, really, really nasty nonsense. And it just should be called out for what it is and then largely ignored if possible. I mean, I had a quick look at the Twitter account of that Dr. Eric Wade. He's got like 26,000 followers and like no engagement. Almost no engagement. Like 2 likes. on some nonsense tweet talking about transgender people in the medieval period or whatever. It's like, no one likes it. No one cares. It's completely against our will. It won't last forever. It can't last forever. These things ebb and flow. Culture isn't static. I mean, history isn't static. Talk about that whole thing there about the Dark Ages. So I'm one of these people that will still just use the term the Dark Ages. I don't care who tries to browbeat me about that. That's not the done thing anymore. I don't care. They say, oh, it's not dark. There's lots and lots of evidence. There's not as much evidence as there is from sort of before or after. So, for example, they talk about 410 BC. That's when the Roman legions left. So in the earlier Byzantine period, or in sort of the Roman period, the 1st century BC, we know more about the 1st century BC than we know about sort of the late 5th century AD, for example. And then after the Norman conquest, or certainly by the age of sort of, I don't know, Edward I or something, again, the literary evidence explodes. So relatively speaking, in terms of literary evidence, that period is quote unquote dark. So I'll call it the Dark Ages. I'm not going to take a lecture from some post-structuralist commie from Berkeley about what words I can or can't use. No, I'll call it the Dark Ages. Thank you very much. And, they say you shouldn't say AD, you shouldn't say BC, it's BCE.
Oh, yes, I've heard that one.
No. I'll use AD and BC, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for the input. I got your opinion on that, and I'm going to keep doing it the way I've always done it. So yeah, we'll move on. Thank you very much.
Well, this is going to be a very fun podcast. We're not even 10 minutes in. It's going to be really good fun. So thank you, Beau, for taking your time out and coming on. Let's start with some brief history on Anglo Saxon, because I think a lot of people, including myself, I must admit, aren't very well read in history, but there are so many people that want to learn but then get inundated with all this crap, like what I've just read out. Can we go over some like a brief history of the Anglo-Saxon period and what you know?
Yeah, sure. So talk for hours and hours, but I suppose a brief overview. Well, one of the first things I would say is that people like us, normal people that haven't got an axe to grind and aren't looking to sort of self-implode and destroy our own culture and heritage, go back to histories that were written a while ago, sort of even pre-World War II, if possible, sort of pre-1960s at least. And then those histories are going to be free of all the sort of nonsense that you get nowadays. So, for example, I'm a big fan of Professor Sir Charles Oman. It's not a very English-sounding name. He was an extremely English man. He was a professor of history at Oxford, and he wrote in the very, very late 19th century, early 20th century. He wrote all sorts of things. He wrote a very, very long, very, very detailed, excellent history of the Peninsular War. That's the story of the British and Wellington in Portugal and Spain fighting Napoleon's marshals. But he also did all sorts of other histories. And he's got a book that's just a single volume, so it's not too much. It's not like Edward Gibbon, a whole shelf worth of history, just one book on the history of the English. And that's a good place to start. It's much more than a child's history. It's more than horrible histories, but it's not so in-depth and so academic. And, there's no stats that he tries to force down your throat or anything like that. And when it was written in the very, very early 20th century, I believe, sort of pre-World War I. So there's none of that baggage that you would get these days. None. So I would start with something like that. Or I know Churchill's in the news at the moment. I'm not actually much of a fan of Churchill the man, nor Churchill the politician. But Churchill the historian is superb. Churchill the writer is very, very good. And he's got the history of the English-speaking peoples. Again, sort of it would be volume 1 of that.
I was going to say, you recommended that to me, and I ordered it. I ordered all the volumes off of eBay for 20 quid.
Not bad. It's good value.
Yeah.
For what you're going to get out of that.
Yeah, exactly.
So in volume 1 there, he starts actually, it's very interesting, he paints this picture of when there was still a land bridge between Britain and France, a long, long time ago, ice ages ago. and that there would have been an inlet at some point, or two inlets, which one day must have actually linked up, and that eventually became the channel. And he paints a picture of that, so he goes back that far. But yeah, like in volume 1 of that, he'll talk all about the Dark Ages, or the period of the Anglo Saxon and Jutish invasions. So let's talk a bit about that. The real history is there's the Anglo Saxon Chronicle, which is the gold standard. Now, the Anglo Saxon Chronicle is a little bit difficult for any normal person, or even a professional historian, because it's not in the modern vernacular. So you'd have to be a linguist, have to be able to read Old English and things. So you can't. A normal person can't just pick up a copy of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Read it. However, you will be able to find, updated translated version, like the Good News Bible version. Like the updated version, so in almost normal parlance. But again, it's complicated, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, because there's many different versions of them. They call them like version A, B, C, D, E. I think there's more than that even. There's a few of them. And they don't agree on things. It was supposed to be one history of the Anglo-Saxon people, written by the Anglo-Saxon people. But they don't agree on things. And their authors, who would have been sort of monastic people, largely, have got their own political agendas and things. So the Anglo-Saxon, I'll explain that in a moment. But just a quick word on the, pardon me. Dear me. Quick word on Saint Bede. Have you ever heard of Saint Bede, or the Venerable Bede?
No.
The monk of Jarrow. So you can get the Venerable Bede, it's just in a Penguin paperback, like $8.99 or something, or off Amazon. My copy of the Venerable Bede is very, very beaten and well read. And he was a man that lived in the 7th and 8th century. Sort of, he died on the first quarter of the 8th century. And he was a monk of Jarrow. And he wrote the history of the Ecclesiastical English Church, or something like that, I think it's called. And so anyway, and that survives. Like I say, you can get it in a Penguin paperback these days.
Wow.
And a fantastic account, just a set of stories, really. Just how Wulfstan of Worcester did or said this one day. And you just get a line like that, and he moves on to something else. And it's just an endless stream of, if you're into it, if you're interested, just an endless stream of tidbits, facts, and things. So they're sort of the two main literary pieces of evidence, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and Bede. You can see already there that Bede is already dead by the 720s, 730s. And the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle goes on. It actually goes on slightly after the Norman Conquest. But it's a difficult thing. So there was no single kingdom of England. We always argue about who's the first king of England, or Angulond, the kingdom of the Angles. And different scholars and historians argue about who that would be. Many say it's sort of Alfred the Great, which is, or maybe Athelstan, who's even after Alfred the Great, which is quite late in the Anglo-Saxon period. So before there, you've got what we now call Great Britain, or Britannia, or England even, was broken up into all sorts of kingdoms. Got like the Kingdom of Northumbria, the Kingdom of Wessex, Kingdom of Mercia. And sometimes they're working together and sometimes not, and sometimes they usurp each other. Sometimes they break up into smaller kingdoms. Sometimes they're almost like there's like one over king, and they've got. So it's a complicated, broken story.
It's like factions within a country, like trying to think like Fallout or something. It sounds silly.
Or Westeros.
Westeros.
The Seven Kingdoms of Westeros. So that was taken. I mean, the guy that wrote, God, what's his name? I can't remember now. Who wrote Game of Thrones? George R.R. Martin.
Oh, yeah.
He was inspired by all sorts of different things. But the idea that Westeros is broken into 7 kingdoms is taken directly from the Anglo-Saxon period, where for a while there were 7 kingdoms in England.
Hmm.
And so Alfred, for example, was Wessex, King of Wessex. And so there's different Anglo-Saxon chronicles that are loyal, if you want, for want of a better word, to different kingdoms. And they've got different axes to grind. They've got different agendas into what they omit and what they play up or play down. But that's the job of a serious historian or scholar, is to try and unpick all those things and try and get at what's really, really real, if you like. And then, of course, there's the physical archaeology. Pardon me. So, probably the most famous thing is the Sutton Hoo treasure. You're aware of the Sutton Hoo treasure, which is in the British Museum. There's a great recreation of the famous helmet there, as well as the real thing, which is a fragmentary thing. And so they say, we don't know really who it was. It was some sort of very, very important Anglo Saxon, dating from the first bit of the 7th century, so the early 600s. They say maybe it's King Radwold, classic Anglo Saxon name that. But we don't know for sure if it is Radwold. I think they think it probably is, but we don't know for sure. And anyway, some very important person in the south of England was buried in the early 600s in a ship. It looks like a Viking longship. It's not exactly Viking, but Viking's a verb anyway. But he was buried in this big ship with loads of treasures, loads of what they thought were valuable things, and his armour and things. The whole ship was buried under a big mound, and then it wasn't dug up until the late 1930s, or during World War II. Just found it just before. All the work was put on hold during the war, and then afterwards they dug it up properly. And so the Sutton Hoo treasure, if anyone out there isn't aware of what that is, and are interested in the Anglo-Saxon period, then you're welcome. It's one of the greatest things ever, the Sutton Hoo treasure. You can go to the British Museum, which is in Bloomsbury, just off Tottenham Court Road in London. You want to actually see it with your own eyeballs. But yeah, as for the actual history, I don't know how much you want to keep. I've only just scratched the surface if you want me to keep going.
Yeah, I think. But
it's
because
it's the Dark Ages. Sorry, Lewis. Sorry.
Go ahead. No. Keep going.
Well, because it is the Dark Ages, and I shall continue to keep calling it the Dark Ages, the literary evidence is scanty. Right, it is scanty, and the archaeological evidence is also fairly scanty, despite things like the Sutton Hoo treasures. So we've got it's a difficult period to know about properly. You know, we've got lots and lots of names of early Anglo-Saxon kings, but often they're little more than a name. We don't really know much or anything about them very, very often. For example, there's Hengist and Horsa, if you've ever heard of Hengist and Horsa. They were apparently two West Saxon or Jutish lords, kings, came over from the continent, landed in, what would it be, Kent, or is it East Anglia? And they landed in the east of England, Hengist and Horsa. They're supposed to be some of the first, if not the first, sort of real Anglo-Saxon wave of Anglo-Saxon invasion. And people, real serious scholars that aren't trying to pervert our idea of history, like some of the people we've already mentioned, they can't agree on really who Hengist and Horsa were exactly, right? I think maybe. I mentioned Tom Rosso earlier, who's an actual medievalist, Anglo-Saxonist, and he thinks they're probably gods, i.e., not really real. That there's something. They're like a literary invention after the fact. But you'll read Churchill, and he talks about them as though they're definitely real historical figures that definitely existed. There were definitely two men, and their names were Hengist and Horsa, and this is where they landed, and this is what they did. But actually, we don't know for sure. That's why it's a dark age.
Right.
Because we can't say for sure, right? We can say to a high degree of certainty that somebody like Pompey or Caesar or Cicero or Crassus or Cato the Younger, we can say with a high degree of certainty that they actually existed.
Jesus Christ.
They were real people, right? And we can say with very high levels of certainty that someone like Oliver Cromwell or Charles Stuart were definitely real historical people. But you go back to something like Hengist and Horsa, or you go back to somebody like, perhaps not Alfred the Great, somebody like King Arthur. Okay, King Arthur, perfect example. Is more myth than man, more legend than reality, right? There's certain figures in history, whether it be Robin Hood or Jesus Christ, the history is a bit shaky. There was probably a person right? There's almost certainly a person, but you can't be 100% sure about the historiography of it, right? There was, someone like William Wallace. There was definitely a William Wallace, right? But the details of his life, exactly what he said and to whom and when, the chain of custody of the accounts of it, like Jesus, it's difficult because a lot of the evidence is after the fact. So anyway, that's why it's thought of as a dark age. So a lot of, particularly the early Anglo-Saxons, what they really, really did and who they were is largely lost. But you can look at the archaeology. Look at the archaeological side. In fact, you can look at the DNA stuff now. Since not too long ago, since sort of 2017, 2019, Tom says there's a great paper from 2022, which I haven't read, but he assures me, shows beyond a doubt that a lot of the archaeology and a lot of the literary evidence is backed up by DNA evidence. In other words, that something in the order of a 70% demographic replacement happened in the east of England starting in the 5th century. In other words, it's a fact that a lot of people came over from sort of Denmark and Germany area, the Anglo Saxons, the Jutes. They came over to the east of England, largely southeast of England, in those centuries, and in all sorts of ways conquered it culturally, if not militarily, at least culturally, and in a demographic sense. Is this
why that if you can speak Old English and you travel to, let's say, Friesland in Holland, and you speak to someone in Old English to someone in Friesland, they can understand you like perfectly. Or I say perfectly, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. It is as simple as that. I mean, modern English people are really with the direct ancestors of those Angles and Saxons and Jutes, with a little bit of Norman sprinkled in, a little bit of Scandinavian if you live up north.
Yeah.
A little bit of Viking.
We're a bit of everything, really, aren't we?
Sprinkled in there. No, a little bit of Irish.
Yeah.
Maybe if you're from Liverpool or something. No, we are their direct ancestors, their direct descendants. So the idea that there's no such thing as the Anglo-Saxons is just a patent nonsense. The idea that we need to do away with the word, no, never. The idea that it needs to be cancelled in order to prevent nationalism, nonsense. There's nothing wrong with nationalism anyway, right? So no, just not having any of that. If the academy, if the universities want to eat themselves trying to do that, want to alienate themselves from the rest of the world, and they're hell-bent on doing that, then I suppose let them. But the normal people will not forget, cannot forget, will not be forced to accept lies. This is what it all boils down to, Lewis, isn't it? This is what it all boils down to, is lies. They want you to accept a lie. Whether you're living in Stalinist Russia or Maoist China, or in a George Orwell dystopian future, or Britain in 2024, they want you to swallow a lie that you know is a lie. They know it's a lie. They know you know it's a lie. Everyone knows it's a lie, and you're expected to swallow it and be quiet about it as well. And they'll gaslight you while they do it, and you can't say anything back. Well, no. Every lie that is told incurs a debt to the truth, and that debt will be repaid eventually. The truth will lie in wait for all time, if needs be. It's not going anywhere. You can't annihilate it. You can't annihilate the truth. And the truth is that there were Anglo-Saxons. It's a real thing. There is a country of England. We are Englishmen.
Yeah.
And we exist. And the liar will not succeed, ultimately.
So, with regards to the university that decided to cancel Anglo-Saxon to decolonize the curriculum, I wanted to just read a bit of what the Telegraph has written about it. It says the University of Nottingham offers leading courses in Anglo Saxon history and literature, and is the only university in the country to offer a Viking studies course. But in a move to decolonise the curriculum, professors have renamed a master's course in Viking and Anglo Saxon studies as Viking and Early Medieval English Studies. A module within the programme titled, quote, Research Methods in Viking and Anglo-Saxon Studies has also had the Anglo-Saxon term removed in favour of Early Medieval English. It follows a similar move in the United States, where the academics in particular have campaigned against the term Anglo-Saxon because it suggests a distinct native Englishness. Now,
we couldn't have that, could we?
No, we couldn't have that. We couldn't have the only land in the entire world to not have an indigenous population. We're not allowed that. No. We know that CRT, or critical race theory, is an imported, quote, academic framework from the United States. It seems to be that the US is really pushing, especially on European countries, for a complete rewrite of history. I know we've already spoken about this briefly in the start of this podcast, but maybe we could elaborate a little bit further. It says the terminology of early medieval England is the preferred replacement for Anglo-Saxon by academics, concerned that the latter has become a phrase used by racists surrounding white identity. Oh. Now, I know you look shocked there, Beau. I mean, it's a recurring theme. I mean, shock horror, critical race theory calls someone racist for simply saying Anglo-Saxon. I mean, for crying out loud. I mean, it's the same. It's almost just laughable. But now that it's actually happened in terms of universities have actually decided to remove the term, I think it's become very serious. Because at first, you laugh at the whole woke things. Ha ha, milk is racist. Ha ha ha. Yeah, good one. But now it's like, no, they're actually completely rewriting history. Like a United States foreign, I want to say, just framework has just infected, I want to say, our curriculums, our institutions, and just completely taken this away with no mandate, no vote. Just no, we'll take that away. How does that make you feel? Is there a way to push back on this, do you think, other than just keep saying Anglo-Saxon in everything? What's your take?
Yeah, no, the idea that the very word Anglo-Saxon is a bit close to having your own ethnic identity, which is exactly the same as being a Nazi. And you're all racist. Oh, we're all racist. Racism. Yeah. Let's say it together. Yeah. No. Screw them. Yeah. No. If the academy wants to do that, go down that road, then so be it. They're going to do it anyway. They've been thoroughly infected by that mind virus. But the rest of the world, the rest of reality, will continue as is. See, the thing is about history. Okay. The past, the real past, what actually happened in the past, is profoundly lost to us. Even one moment ago, even this morning, you can never get it back. It was a moment in time which is now lost, in profoundly lost to us. And we can never agree on exactly what happened. Even this morning, you can never really agree on it. There's no such thing as truly objective view of the past. So history will always be
slant.
It will always be a story. It will always be a narrative. There will always be the hand of the author, of the historian, telling the history. There's no way to avoid that. Okay, but good history, real serious history, is an attempt to remove the hand of the historian as much as possible, to try and get to that sort of objective fact or truth as best possible. But we see, as I said at the beginning, we see these people as they're simply sort of nakedly activists. They're not interested in real history, serious history. They're interested in peddling an agenda, a quite disgusting agenda, actually. But that's what they're interested in. Okay, and if they're hell-bent on doing it and they've captured Nottingham University medieval department, then they're going to do it. There's no way to stop them other than flooding the institution back with normal historians. That's one way of doing it. But, people like you or I have got no ability to do that. That's a long struggle. But the idea of it will swing back. The pendulum will swing back the other way, just like in the culture wars at large. It will swing back the other way. If we see our civilization, heavily involved in transgenderism or sort of the mass promotion of homosexuality or something, the pendulum has swung a long way from, say, the 1950s. Ed Dutton talks about how it's interesting that if you take the 1950s in the West, in Britain and America, for example, it was more anti-gay or more homophobic, if you like, than the 1930s. Okay, interestingly, the androgyny was more acceptable in the 20s than it was in the 50s. Oddly, right? So the pendulum had swung quite far that way. Now the pendulum swung really far the other way, right? Well, you can't have an advert which doesn't show a transgender person. You can't have a flight steward that isn't transgender or something, right? So the pendulum will swing back. The same goes with history. And I talked about a moment ago how it can only ever be a narrative. So that's going to happen. There will always be a debate. There will always be a battle over history, what it is, what really happened, and what it really meant.
Yeah.
Just at the moment, the pendulum has swung in a direction where a lot of these people, they're not even trying to get towards that objective truth. Not even trying, not putting up any pretense that that's what they're doing. They'll say something like, pardon me, dear me, we need to decolonise an Anglo Saxon department in Nottingham, England. This is insane. This is insane. They're into the realms of absolute tail-eating insanity.
Mm.
And so the pendulum will swing back at some point. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. It is infuriating, believe me. I'm sitting here with a bit of a smirk, but it is infuriating. Of course it is.
Mm.
I can't think of many things that are more infuriating than the current state of the battlefield over history, our heritage. But it won't last. They cannot win ultimately. Because, as I say, the truth, reality will win out. It's very, very difficult. Usually censorship throughout history, censorship and lies eventually lose.
Yep.
Nearly always. So I think at some point, if this sort of hand-wringing, pearl-clutching sort of, we can't have the word Anglo-Saxon, we need to use early English or something like that, because the word itself it perpetuates racism, we'll end up... The next step from using the word Anglo-Saxon in Nottingham University is a concentration camp. That's the next step. It's like, it's mad. It's mad. And most people, the vast majority of normal people, know that it's mad, that it's nonsense. There's this weird imported thing, this, critical race theory or critical theory, whatever you want to call it. Again, I mentioned Robin DiAngelo earlier. This idea that whiteness itself, not the actual our physical white skin, but the
ideology
concept,
of
the concept of whiteness.
Yeah.
Which includes all of our history and heritage, and everything we are, both physically and metaphysically. All of that is, at its very core, at inception, evil. That the world would be better off without it. The world would be better off with no white people and no white culture, no white history. It should be wiped out, like the way Stalin would wipe out the memory of someone. It's not enough just to kill them and disappear their body, but any evidence that they ever existed, or how Big Brother does it in 1984, that all the evidence that it ever existed needs to be annihilated and wiped out as well. This is the first steps to that. But it cannot get very far. It cannot get very far unless we see some sort of worldwide global conflagration which does annihilate all white people and then goes on to annihilate all evidence that they ever existed. I don't see that happening, right? I don't see that happening. I don't think it's possible. So let these mentalists in Anglo Saxon departments in some shitty university like Nottingham, let them do whatever they want to do, right? And their intake, their new undergrad intake, will drop off a cliff because most people that are interested in history are not interested in that nonsense. So they'll lose money. Go woke, go broke. That exactly the same happens in universities. Look at Evergreen University in Washington State. Their intake fell off a cliff because people don't want to live in some sort of dystopian, pro-commie, weirdo, freak thing. They don't want it. People don't want it, mostly. So it will fail. I'm very confident it will fail.
I'm trying to think because it's quite a lot to take in with regards to how history. You're so right when you say history is the person who writes it. He's almost in control of what occurred and what happened. Like the best analogy you gave is, well, what happened this morning? And then lots of people will say all different, like how their morning went and how the morning happened. Even if you're all together, sometimes you don't reach consensus on absolutely everything. So, you have to be mindful. But I have found myself going back to classical literature and just reading either pre-World War II or just after World War II. I'll give you an example, and I won't go too much off on a tangent. I went into Oxfam yesterday. It's a personal story. I went into Oxfam because I was just looking at the classic section. I was just looking for some books because, as you do, I've suddenly had this ignition inside of me to want to learn things. That's why I wanted to bring you on today and talk a bit about Anglo Saxon history. But I was in Oxfam and I saw Moby Dick, the classic novel written in the 1850s, and I picked it out. It's £2.50, and I thought, I've never ever read this. I've never had an interest to read it. Why am I picking it up? Why am I having a look at it? And I read the blurb, and I was weirdly captivated by the idea of a man's obsession and becoming frantic, and just it was just a hyper focus on a man going a bit mental over a whale because he cut his leg off or whatever. He reeked his leg, and I got home. I opened it, I started to read it, and I was weirdly captivated by the archaic language and the analogies and the attempt to sort of string these sentences together. It was just like I stumbled across a new language, but I could understand it. It was really strange. And I've found it now with history, philosophy, with novels, with all sorts of things. I feel like I'm going back to classic literature. I don't know if you've found the same. I don't know if it's because of the current climate with the culture wars and I guess wokeism. I guess it's sort of pushing me into that realm of wanting to see how the world saw things, or how the world wrote things down or written things pre World War II. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's Herman Melville, isn't it? Moby Dick?
Yes, that's the one.
So, yeah, it's sort of higher Victoriana, beautifully written. Read it many years ago now, probably 20 years ago now I read that. But it's famous. It's a famous novel for a reason, because it's a masterpiece of prose. So I absolutely agree with you. One example I would give is Edward Gibbon. There's an amazing set of books called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon. They are the absolute gold standard. And they're very, very long. Whenever you see a copy of The Decline and Fall, it's either just one volume or it's a heavily abridged version, because the full thing is honestly about this big on your shelf. And it chronicles the end of Rome. The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, exactly as it says on the tin, from the age of the Antonines, so the mid-2nd century AD, just after sort of Hadrian and Trajan times, all the way through to the fall of Constantinople in 1453. So it's a massive period. And anyway, what you were saying there about the language of it, sort of rediscovering it, it was written right at the end of the 18th century. Okay. And the language used, the voice of it, the tone is very, very antiquated, very, very old-fashioned. It's actually very, very difficult. At first, you almost don't know what he's saying a lot of the time. At first, you're like, wait, what did it... That was so convoluted and so many obscure words that I don't even know what he actually said there. But if you persevere with it and you sort of get your ear in, right, eventually you get used to it. Listen to it on audiobooks, much easier than trying to actually read it off the page. Eventually you get your ear in and you get used to it, like quite quickly as well, very quickly. And then it's one of the most rewarding things anyone that's interested in history will ever have. For me, Edward Gibbon. Again, it's a classic, absolute gold standard for a reason, because it is so superb. It's one of the best things ever put to paper, in my opinion. Edward Gibbon.
Wow.
You know, it's the same with Shakespeare. Sometimes when you're not used to Shakespeare,
and
you watch Shakespeare, you're like, I don't even... There's loads of things there I didn't understand. If I'm honest with myself, I don't know what that word means. I don't know what that was a reference to. I don't get it. But if you persevere enough, or you watch the same play enough, you watch a few different versions of Hamlet, many times, eventually you sort of pick it up and you get it. And eventually, as I say, you get your ear in and you get used to it. If you could do that with Edward Gibbon, it will be the most rewarding thing ever. But yeah, a lot of sort of high Victorian literature, something like Moby Dick. I'm a big fan of Treasure Island.
Okay.
Again, a great novel. Absolutely brilliant. And yeah, people should go back to this stuff. People should go back to this stuff because they're masterpieces often. Dickens is great. Dickens is really, really great. A Tale of Two Cities, incredible. Anyway, there's so many examples. I won't try and list the best things to read that are like pre-World War II, because there's so much. But yeah, I think we have to go back. I've thought that for a long time. Many different people I know have said this for a long time, and not just about history, about all sorts of stuff. Don't really bother watching films that are post 2010. Because, true. Because there's 1,000,001 films from before then that are great, that are still worth watching. I'm a proponent of that. There's some great old black and white films. There's a great film from the 60s. It's Richard Burton, is it? With The Spy That Came In From the Cold. I rewatched it not too long ago. And it's black and white. It's from the 60s. It's about the Cold War. You know, it's made during the Cold War and about the Cold War. And it's extremely slow. The story is very, very slow. And for a big chunk of the film, especially near the beginning, there's like no real dialogue. Hardly anyone says anything. But it's sort of a masterpiece. It doesn't need to do that. It doesn't need to whack you over the head like a Transformers film. You don't need someone actually saying, and now I'm going to do this, and then they do it. It doesn't need any of that. It gives the audience credit. It lets you understand it for yourself. It lets you make up your own mind about what's going on. It will hint at something. Just merely hint at something once, quickly. And it's up to you as a grown-up to get it, right? And that's what a lot of literature's like. You know, something like Moby Dick. It doesn't have to hit you over the head with every tiny little thing. And just hint at something. Anyway, people love that. People love that. There's a reason why loads of people moan about why all the new Star Wars stuff is so crap, or Transformers films or something. There's a reason why people moan about it, because it is throwaway trash. And most people, normal people, you don't need to be well-read. You don't need a PhD in literature or anything. You don't need to go to film studies class in order to have a decent understanding of what is or isn't a good film. So yeah, I hope you enjoy Moby Dick. It is quite slow, but it's worth it, right? Something like Frankenstein. Incredible novel. It's quite slow. It's quite difficult. At first, it's fairly impenetrable, but stick with it, and it will be absolutely rewarding. Yeah,
I finished chapter 4 last night, and it's so funny because I sat there and I went through my mind and I was going, okay, what happened in the past 4 chapters? Like, okay, so he did this, he did that. How has he managed to describe and use analogies for one simple thing, like looking over at a man in a bar or something? And it's just this analogy, all these analogies and the descriptions of everything and all this archaic language that I don't understand, but I'm there like, I'm here for it. It's really strange. You reminded me with films as well. I know we've completely dived off, which is great. That's absolutely fine.
Sure.
I watched Zulu for the first time. And that was a couple of months ago, about a month ago, I think, or like 3 weeks ago, I think. I watched Zulu for the first time, and I felt ashamed. I almost felt ashamed that I hadn't watched it. And it was one of those moments where I was like, I get it. I totally get it. You know, it was like a light bulb moment. It was like, I get why things like this are so loved and cherished, and that when bringing it back into the cancellation, bringing it back into, you know, Anglo Saxons aren't real and things like that. I get why people get really frustrated when academics, when film critics, or when, I don't know, institutions, or, you know, people on the TV that you know are responsible for putting films up, or libraries, they take this away from you. They take that joy away from you. It's like, well, let people decide for themselves, actually. You know, we're supposed to be this liberal democracy of free thinking ideas, the marketplace of ideas, which you know is bullshit now, completely. Let people decide for themselves. But it seems to me that there is this agenda to just want to take, I don't know, from identity to films films, literature, and media that I guess you want to call them globalists, or you want to call them the establishment, just want to take away from you. That's how I see it. I mean, it sounds a bit alarmist, but that's how I kind of see it.
Yeah, and only sort of the white Western man as well that they want to denigrate and take away from. They're not looking to denigrate or take away from the culture of Benin, West Africa or something.
Right.
They're not trying to rewrite or annihilate the history of Bangladesh, are they? No. But Colour Sergeant Bull from Zulu, we won't put that on TV anymore, though.
No,
because that sounds like a strong Englishman. So you can't have that. Do you tunic up, boy? Who do you think you are? Yeah, it's brilliant. I love Zulu. Absolutely love it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it used to be on TV, even when I was a kid. So, you know, not that long ago, 20 odd years ago, whatever, 30 years ago. Used to have Zulu used to be on TV all the time, it seemed. Obviously it wasn't all the time, but I've watched it off TV like half a dozen times, I'm sure. It was just a staple. They quite often put it on at Christmas, if I seem to remember. And now they wouldn't put it on TV anymore. Simply wouldn't put it on TV. And lots of other things like Lawrence of Arabia.
Yes, great film.
For example, unbelievably great film, unbelievably incredible story, but it shows an extremely brave, a hero really, white dude. It shows the British Army or the British Empire doing extremely well and sort of dominating Arabs in various ways. Can't show that. You just can't show it. It's historical fact, but you can't show it. You can't do that. So yeah, you're right. Did you call it sinister? Anyway, yeah, absolutely sinister, because it is the thin end of the wedge. You know, this is the beginning of it, or it's already been going on since the war, or since the 1960s or 70s. So it's not just started, but it's still really the thin end of the wedge. Where does that wedge lead ultimately? Well, if certain people had their way, if certain sort of critical race theorists, certain critical analysis theorists had their way, it would lead to our annihilation, complete. I mean, in true genocidal sense. I don't think it's going to be possible, but certainly we do need to stand up and, at the very least, say something. At the very least, ridicule them. At the very least, point it out. At the very least, refuse to not notice. That makes sense. No, notice it and mention that you've noticed it. Have a bit of courage to, even within your own friend and family groups, to say something, or in your own friend and family groups, or in your own Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups or whatever it is that you're in. And there's some disgusting mental commie saying that they don't think whiteness is real or something. Push back against them. Say, no, what are you talking about? That's nonsense. What do you think you're talking about? Right? We've got to do it. It's got to happen on a large scale. It's got to. We can't just go into the darkness quietly. Or I'm not, anyway. People like you or I'm not just going to shuffle off into the darkness without saying anything. No. We were not descended from fearful men, right? We've got a struggle now. We've actually got a struggle. There's a bit in Fight Club, isn't it, when Tyler Durden says, our grandfathers had the war, and they had a great struggle. And we've got it was in the 1990s. We've got no great struggle. Our great struggle is the boredom of our own lives. Well, you've got a struggle now, bro. Got a very real struggle with these critical race theorists, with these race communists that mean to annihilate us if they could. You've got a struggle now. Got something to work towards and do now. So do it. Stand up. Say something. Come on. Off your knees. And we can do it and we'll win. And we'll win. We're Englishmen. Come on. We've been invaded before. We've had various people try and take the absolute mickey out of us before, whether it's the Romans or the Vikings or the Normans or Mr. Hitler in the long summer of 1940, wherever it was. No, we stand up and we throw two fingers up them and we don't say sorry about that. And we'll do it again.
What have the Romans ever done for us, eh?
Nothing. They never did anything for us, apart from the aqueduct.
Yeah.
It was the aqueduct.
You know, I must admit, just to end on this, I used to be quite a passive, very, very passive guy. Kept my head down, never wanted to speak out about anything. If I saw something, I was like, oh, okay, well, that's their opinion. You know, I'm just going to remain in my box, remain in my comfort zone. You know, oh, you have a disagreement with that? Fine. Yeah, you're more than welcome. That's fine. You know, I'm just going to be over here, you know, and I'm going to do my own thing. There comes a point, and I think the mRNA era of 2020 till I guess now has kind of awoken a spark in me to say, actually, no, that is wrong. We need to talk about this. And then all other subjects started to mold around that. And so if you found yourself, even during the 2020 era, going, actually, I'm not happy with that. Actually, you know, we need to talk about this. Actually, no, I won't get what the government is telling me to do. Actually, no, I think it's wrong that the curriculum in Cambridge is telling students that Anglo Saxons aren't real to fight nationalism. Or actually, no, we need to change the name actually and get rid of the term Anglo Saxon because, you know, it's perceived as racist. Like, no, it's not racist, actually. There's nothing racist about it at all. It's history. Thank you very much. You should, if you're feeling like you were passive and something's awoken, keep at it, I would say. I mean, that would be my advice. But Beau,
no, absolutely. Just quickly, if I could add to that. No, that's exactly what they want you to do, is to be passive. That's exactly what they don't just want, they need you really to be quiet and just take it, be deracinated. And it's not okay. They want you to be quiet because there's this idea, you know, just let me grill, bro. Just if you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone and everyone can live in peace. They're not going to leave you alone. International communism is not leaving anyone alone. There's nowhere to run. Like Peter Hitchens says, I'll move away. Where to? There's literally nowhere on the earth. It's not going to hunt you out and come for you. So make a stand.
Yeah.
Make a stand. Something. Do it proudly.
Yeah, say something, indeed. Beau Dade, thank you so much. That was a really fun podcast. Something different. Bit of Anglo-Saxon history, bit of classical literature, you know, and it all ties in. It all ties in very, very well. Of course, at the start of the podcast, I mentioned where we can find you. Could you once again tell us where we can find you and your work? And the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, I've got my own channel, HistoryBro, on YouTube. So go on there, 250 odd videos just about history, lots of ancient history, everything from Göbekli Tepe through to Thucydides and all sorts of things, lots of medieval stuff and even some 20th century things about World War I, World War II, Mao. So all sorts of stuff there on HistoryBro, my own channel. But my day job is working for the podcast of the Lotus Eaters. I'm here if anyone might recognise it, the second studio, the podcast of the Lotus Eaters. And I'm on the daily podcast once or twice a week where we talk about current events and, daily sort of politics, the grind of that, of the news cycle. But I've also got my own quote unquote show behind the paywall at the podcast of the lotuseaters.com called Epochs. And I'm up to like 175 odd episodes of that. Currently, I'm in the middle of a long series about the decline and fall of the Roman Republic, talking all about Pompey and Caesar at the moment. Just recorded a thing, it's going out this Sunday, all about the early life of Julius Caesar. So there's that. And also you can just find me on Twitter, just as Beau Dade, where I'm extremely scathing and rude to leftists and globalists and socialists on a daily basis. So check me out there, follow me there, if that's your bag.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Beau. And I've realised you're the only Lotus Eaters podcast host that I haven't done a segment with, so we must get that changed.
Really? On the podcast? So we've not been on the podcast together?
No, we've only just chatted in the kitchen over a cup of tea. I think that's it.
Well, we must remedy that. Next time you're in, I'll get Samson, our producer, to make sure we're on together.
Great. Good stuff. Beau Dade, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.